Let's get into the 10 steps now. The first step is setting long-term goals. It's important to know what I mean by long-term goals. A long-term goal is not college or anything like that. It's simply the next grading period, what your child wants in school, what kind of grades he wants on the report card. So you simply ask that question. Now, you'll also notice that part of this step is creating honesty. If you haven't already established that honesty is an important value, which would be done if you're using the supplementary disciplines I've talked about earlier, then you want to establish that sense of honesty now. You should want a good, honest approach to solving problems. You're going to help him solve the problems. So you set the stage. Once that stage is set, you simply ask, what are the grades you would like to make at the end of this reporting period? For some schools it's 9, for other schools it's 6 weeks. Now, many times underachievers will tell you they just want to pass. And that's too broad a goal. A goal must be very specific. Like, does that mean 70? Or does that mean an A? Does that mean, because passing can be anything. So you want him to, or her, to establish some sense of what to shoot for. Sometimes I recommend telling children that having a goal is like learning to shoot a rifle. When you're aiming at a target, if you just sort of point it down toward the target somehow, you'll never learn to hit the bullseye. But if you take a dead beat on the bullseye, and if you don't hit the bullseye, you'll at least get close. And eventually you'll learn how to shoot a rifle and become a proficient marksman. That's what setting a goal is. Now, kids may say all kinds of things to you, like, well, gee, Dad or Mom, I want to do 100 in every class. I'll make 100 in every class. And I've had kids tell me that. Usually that reveals a kind of perfectionism hidden away down in the youngster. Or they're telling you what they think you want to hear. I would make it very clear that you're not interested in anybody else's thoughts or feelings or no one else's goals, but what your son or daughter really wants in their heart of hearts for themselves. If they give you goals that are too high, I'll simply have a common reaction. My 100 is pretty high up there. If you make one little mistake, you don't get it. How would you feel if you weren't going to make that 100 or that A? See, if a youngster's used to making 60s and 50s, making an A may be a good indication of their values, but it's probably not realistic. So I would try to talk them down. But I never, as just a policy, I never try to talk a youngster up. If they say, I just don't believe I can make anything higher than a D, that's what I'm shooting for, I just want to pass, and you talk about it and it's honest, then I'd set it there. I'd say, fine, I will accept the goal they offer me unless it's too high. Now, my usual experience with most kids is that as time wears on, and you constantly will be referring back to their goals, if they've set the goals too low, they will start raising them as time goes on. You just have to have confidence that your child has your values. If they set goals that are way below what they can actually do, then they will eventually raise them if you work with them in an honest way. That step 1 is fairly easy to achieve and shouldn't be a difficult problem. However, if a youngster is a con artist, for example, they'll approach that goal setting with some disdain. They'll look at you like you're an idiot, and they're just going to tell you something and shrug it off and not be anywhere committed to that goal at all. I wouldn't make an issue out of goal setting at the moment other than to have something clearly stated. Because if you're dealing with a con artist, he doesn't believe anything he's telling you anyway, but that will become clear as it goes on. Most of the other kids, other types, will be fairly straight with you. Now, once you have that, I would just write it down. In fact, I would even have them write their classes on a sheet of paper and say what the grades were last time and what the grades they want next time. Very simple. The next step, step 2, is a little more complex. in which you ask your child to tell you how he or she is going to make those grades. And you may need to structure that a little bit. You may know a lot of information about how they study and what they're going to do, but you want them to tell you. So I would ask questions like this: where do you study? How are you going to do this? Where would you like to set up? What time, how much time do you need to put in, do you think? What's required of math, English, science, and history? What's required of those classes for you to get these grades? What are you going to have to do? And I would just ask these questions. Now, normally you'll get fairly vague answers. Well, I have to study harder. If you get something like study harder, you have to think in terms of what sounds vague. Try to make it more specific. In fact, throughout the 10 steps, there's one key word: is specify, specify, specify. You want things concrete and specific as possible. So you ask them, if they say study harder, say, well, what does that actually mean in terms of behavior? Does it mean that you'll study so much time, that you'll put more effort in, or does it mean that somehow you'll concentrate harder? What does that actually mean when you sit down to do work? That is also relatively easy. Once you state a goal and you get some indication of how your child's going to reach for that goal, step 3 then rapidly follows. Now, many times you already know the information in step 3. You already know, for example, that they don't turn in homework, or they have problems with memory, or they're easily bored. But sometimes you'll find problems at step 2. So they don't know what's required in a class. They may have been in a class for 3 weeks already, but they don't know how to make a better grade. You may see that kind of vagueness about them, in which case you now are beginning to define a significant problem. Now, defining a significant problem is where we began to see a lot of variations in emotions in kids, because that's when it starts getting iffy for them. They start getting a sense that if they keep talking, they're going to define things in such a way they're, oh my heavens, actually be accountable for their behavior. So let me give you an example. Suppose that we'll call this student John. And what happens is John gives you some goals. He doesn't seem to be very committed to them. He gives them to you in an offhanded way, but you accept them. You ask him how he's going to achieve them, and he gives you a lot of vagueness. I'll study harder, I'll do better. And you can pin him down a little bit more. And you say to John, what's prevented you from doing well in the past? What do you think, John? And he starts telling things like, well, it's boring. History's boring, and I don't like history, and the teacher isn't any good, and I hate school, and it's hard to concentrate. I can't get things in. My memory doesn't work. Well, he may have given you a whole bunch of problems. What's important at this point is to hone in on one thing that you feel is significant. If, for example, he says, I'm bored, that's when you start getting his perspective. This is what makes the 10-step program much different from almost any other technique around, is that you will spend a great deal of time getting his or her unique perspective on their problems. And a couple of things are happening here. The first thing that's happening is that you're getting a lot more information than you normally would. The second thing that's happening is, you know what? Your child is starting to feel a little more understood. Let me give you an example. I hate the teacher, or the teacher hates me. Let's do the teacher hates me. You go, really? Tell me about that. And that's an open-ended question. Tell me about that is not asking a specific question. Don't ask a question where you can go, uh-huh, or no, or yes. That's not good enough. You want him to talk. Say, tell me more about that. How do you know the teacher hates you? What's going on? And he'll explain the teacher's behavior, and you follow up and get his perspective on how that affects him, how he feels about it, and how he acts afterwards. Okay, I don't do homework because the teacher hates me. Then you ask, has that ever happened to you before? Now, you may have some of those answers, but get him to talk to you. See, we're working on communication. Get him to talk to you. He says, well, it's happened last year and the year before. In fact, some kids have one favorite teacher they pick on every year to hate them so they can do badly in that class and underachieve there. So you just focus on his perspective. Then you ask, what does hating the teacher have to do with not doing the work? How does it go from I hate the teacher to actually not doing homework and not studying for test or whatever the youngster's doing? And then you begin to define the problem even further, because what you're taking is from the external point of view, the teacher, now focusing on how this child makes decisions that lead to failure. Now, once you have understood the problem thoroughly, it doesn't matter whether it's boredom, forgetting, I don't understand algebra, and I'll talk about some of those specific kinds of problems in a moment. But whatever you define as the problem, your next question is, what happens if that problem isn't solved? Now, that's a very important step, and don't skip it. And I'll tell you why that's important. Underachievers deny there's a connection between today and tomorrow when they're having to function. For instance, if they're just talking to you, they can see, well, okay, if I don't solve a problem, I'll fail. They can see it, but you want it spoken to you, so that link is established in your relationship with your child, because you're going to be following up on that theme throughout. He stated what he wants. Most kids will say, I want C and above in their classes. They have now a significant problem that's leading to failure in the child's eyes. Now, it's very simple. What happens if you remain, say, bored, and you don't do your work, and what's going to happen next? What's going to happen at the end of 6 weeks? Now, you get the child to see the connection, get him to say what's really going to happen. Well, they'll continue to fail. If they hate the teacher, and based on that hatred, they don't do the work, then they will do what? They'll fail. And you get them to link that problem with an outcome. And on the other side of that, if you solve that problem somehow, if you fix that problem, what's going to happen? And you get the youngster to articulate, well, if I fix it, then I'll probably do better in that class. Now, what has happened when you do that, if we've moved from an external situation, here's the problem outside of me I have no control over, to understanding that it's his problem to fix. It is his difficulty. It's not yours. It's not the teacher's, not the school, not anything else. No one else can fix it but him. That is vital. Do not skip that linking step. It's also just as vital to get the kid's perspective, get him to acknowledge that there's a problem to be fixed and that it is his. Now, once you have step 4 done, and I'm going to go through some examples as we go along that will give you a good focus on just how this is accomplished. Here's where things begin to slow down, and there's a lot of danger now, because step 5 is you narrow the focus on the problem that has to be fixed. You narrow the focus and you make plans. Well, let me rephrase that. The focus is narrowed and the child makes the plans. And this is what's danger for most parents, because every underachiever creates what I call the responsibility gap. It's my problem, but I'm not going to make plans. I'm going to create a vacuum. I'm going to not know. I'm going to go, duh, I don't know. Now, what your temptation is to jump right in and start solving the problem. Suppose it's organization, and your youngster's notebooks are disorganized, so he can't find his homework. He doesn't have it ready, he doesn't turn it in, or he doesn't know what happens, he forgot something. Now, immediately, you start thinking, well, if you organize your notebook this way, I'm sure you've done that before, or you write your notes, or you write your assignments down in your assignment sheet, and you bring it home, everything will be there, and you'll know. Now, that may be true and logical, but who has done the thinking? You. And you have inadvertently made your child even more dependent on you, because he's not doing the thinking it takes to solve the problem on his own. So you ask him to solve the problem. Now, Most of the time, you'll get such things as "I don't know," "I can't think of anything." They'll kind of wait for you. What you get with the "I don't know," which is the real showstopper for most parents because that stumps the parent as well, I would recommend saying something like this. Well, if you don't know how you can solve the problem, just come up with any old idea. We'll just brainstorm, explain what brainstorming is. They still don't know. Say, well, I'll tell you what, when I'm stuck, I go off by myself and think. So why don't you do that? You go to your room and don't turn on the stereo, take the radio away. They have to go someplace, sit down, think it through, and then come back out with some potential answers. It may take, and the kid says, well, how long will I have to be in my room? Or how long will I have to be this weekend? How long are we going to do this? You say, I don't know. However long it takes for you to come up with an answer of some kind. That transfers responsibility to the kid, not to you. Now, the other gap that kids create are dumb plans. They'll create something that you know ain't going to work. Now, one passive, sort of procrastinating kid who always buried his anger said, well, what I'm going to do to get homework assignments home and back, I'm going to stuff all the assignment sheets in my pocket, so when I get home I'll be sure to have them, and then I'm going to paste the homework to the outside of each book with the tape. That way I'll have it. Now, the obvious answer is going to put it in his notebook, right? Whatever lousy plan they start creating, you go with it. See? No matter how dumb it sounds, that's sometimes, especially the hidden perfectionist, will create a plan that he knows darn good and well you're going to go crazy at because it's not well organized. And he knows how to organize himself really well, but he's going to do it some dumb way that's almost sure to fail. But that's all right. You let him do it. And then you play the good Columbo. You get your little pad of paper out, you take a little note, get your crumpled suit on, get your cigar, and you say, what are the snags that could happen this time? What could go wrong with this? And you help him think through what could go wrong. Well, what if, the little tape came off? Or what if you left it in the blue jeans and we washed it? How are you going to handle all these little problems that might crop up with your plan? See, that hones the plan in. So you have a link the original problem, say the organizational problem, to the outcome. Now he's going to solve it with some dumb plan. Then you start honing that in with, well, what happens if? What are you going to do if this happens? What about this? And you know what? Pretty soon, they have to get more concrete. The plan starts improving. And some kids get real mad and stomp out of the room. They're not going to put up with these dumb questions. That's stupid. And off they go. And you think, oh no, it's failed. Don't think that. Think, oh good. He's just expressed a horrible feeling. I bet he's going to feel better getting all that anger out. And you let him go have his anger. He slams the door, mumbles up in his room. About 10 or 15 or 20 minutes later, it's hard to maintain that kind of anger. They come down and you say something like this. Boy, I bet you feel better having got all that out of your system. Now, how are you going to handle this forgetting again? Now, how are you going to handle not having the things right? How about this snag or that snag? You just keep doing it. And after a while, they get the message, I'm going to have to think. Now, when you have some kind of plan that is concrete and specific enough that it could work, this is when the real work occurs. Now, you think, my heavens, doctor, we've already done this. He's got a plan. What do I do next? Well, you redefine success and failure not as the grade he may make, but as actually following that plan, actually doing what he said he's going to do. Now, I probably need to give you some kind of example. Suppose that there is take procrastination. Wouldn't that be a good one? A youngster is procrastinating, never getting started, always late, getting his homework in, missing homework, and not studying. So you define procrastination as the problem. And we'll call him Johnny. Johnny says, well, I don't know what to do. I can't get myself to study. All right, that's true. Remember what the procrastinator's problem is? He wants you to take charge, but he's afraid you will. So as you're making a plan, you ask him, Johnny, when are you going to get started studying tonight? That will help you with procrastination. You just tell me when you're going to get started, because procrastinators want everything vague. And Johnny says, well, I'll get started after supper. Too vague, but when after supper? You can become the broken record, or I suppose the chipped CD. You just keep repeating the same question until he finally gives you a specific time. He will be started studying. I will start at 7. All right. Now you have something that's concrete that you can observe. Now, at this point, as you define success and failures, getting started at 7, and you analyze the decisions behind it, because that's really how we defeat underachievement and how we unhook excuses. So he says you say to him, now, Johnny, what happens at 7 o'clock if you actually sit down to start studying? What kind of decision are you making? And Johnny will probably say something like, well, a good decision, but you have him define that situation clearly. Actually, it's a decision to be successful and follow his plans. And you get him to articulate that. I'm deciding to do what I said I'm going to do. Now, if you're dealing with a procrastinator, underachiever, you want to make sure you say something like this. That means you'd be your own boss, right? And I won't have to be. That defines the situation very clearly. Who's going to be the boss? And Johnny will. Johnny, what if you decide not to sit down at 7 and follow your plan? What's happening? Well, I'm doing the same old thing. And you help him define it. That would be counting as a failure. Failures is not following your plan. Success is actually doing what you said you were going to do. Now, every time you do something like this, I want you to initiate step 7, initiate introspection. All kids have conflicts and all kinds of feelings about follow through. That's what they don't do, right? They don't follow through on their plans. So you ask him, what would he give up if he actually sat down at 7 to do his work? And what he's going to give up are all the other activities he could be doing. Watching TV, talking to friends. You have to sacrifice that. Then you get him to say how he would feel about that sacrifice. Most kids will tell you they really don't like it, and that's fine. What are you going to gain when you do sit down? Well, I'll gain more success in school. I'll do my work. I'll get things done. There's another hidden problem, especially for kids who are somewhat shy. It puts them in the position of having to solve more problems. If he actually sits down at 7 to work, he's got to work. Or he now has to study something. So there's more problems to solve now. So you see, that's going to raise anxiety a little. So what you say is, how do you want to feel when you actually sit down and do the work? How would you like to feel? Now, most techniques for helping kids never deal with their emotional states. And some kids won't know what you're talking about, especially the hidden perfectionists. They'll say, what do you mean? How do I want to feel? So they don't feel much anyway, they think. Say, no, how would you like to experience sitting down? How would you like to feel? And Johnny says, just normal. I just want to keep hating it. That's fine, because it's his feelings. It's his emotions. Let him do it.